The gunshot that killed Josephine Crawford's husband echoed through the Colorado plains for 3 seconds before silence swallowed everything whole. It was the spring of 1878, and Josephine stood in the doorway of her modest homestead 5 miles outside Raton, watching the rider disappear into the dust with her last $20 and her husband's pocket watch. Thomas had been dead for less than an hour, his body still warm on their bedroom floor where he had confronted the drifter who had come begging for food. She had warned Thomas about his trusting nature, about how the war had ended more than a decade ago, but men were still dangerous and desperate. Now she was alone with 2 children, a failing ranch, and winter provisions that would not last through summer. Josephine was 26 years old, though she felt ancient as she turned back to face her home. Her daughter Margaret was only 7, her son Samuel just 4. They huddled together near the fireplace, their eyes wide with the kind of fear that no child should know. She forced herself to walk toward them with steady steps, forced herself to kneel down and pull them into her arms, forced herself to whisper that everything would be fine even as her world crumbled like dried earth. The next morning brought no relief, only the stark reality of her situation. The ranch needed repairs she could not afford. The cattle needed tending she could not manage alone. The children needed feeding when the larder grew thinner each day. Josephine buried her husband in the small plot behind the house where the wildflowers grew thick in summer, reading from the Bible with a voice that cracked and broke. Margaret held Samuel's hand throughout the service, both of them silent as stones. 3 weeks passed like a slow death. Josephine sold what she could spare, but Raton was a small town and most folks had troubles of their own. She tried to maintain the ranch, waking before dawn to milk the 3 remaining cows, to gather eggs from the chickens, to mend fences that seemed to break faster than she could fix them. Her hands blistered and bled. Her back ached from labor she had never been strong enough to manage. At night, she collapsed into bed and stared at the empty space beside her, wondering how long before she failed completely. The bank in Raton held the deed to her land, and the banker, Mr. Morrison, made it clear that sympathy only extended so far. "I understand your predicament, Mrs. Crawford," he said from behind his wide oak desk, his spectacles reflecting the lamplight. "But business is business. You have until the end of August to make your payment, or I will have no choice but to foreclose." August was 4 months away. She needed $300. She had 12. Josephine took in washing from the few families in town who could afford such luxuries, scrubbing clothes until her knuckles were raw, and her shoulders screamed in protest. She sold her wedding ring, the silver locket her mother had given her, the good china that had survived the journey west. Each sacrifice felt like peeling away a piece of her soul, but still it was not enough. Margaret grew quieter each day, her childhood slipping away as she helped with chores beyond her years. Samuel cried less but smiled never, his small face drawn and worried. It was on a scorching June morning that Josephine's mare went lame, and with her went Josephine's last thread of hope. She stood in the barn, one hand on the horse's neck, and finally let herself cry. Great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal, the kind of crying that could only come from complete despair. She cried for Thomas, for her children, for the life she had imagined that would never be. She cried until there was nothing left inside her but hollow exhaustion. That afternoon, a cowboy rode into her yard. Josephine saw him from the kitchen window where she was rationing the last of their flour, trying to calculate if she could make it stretch another week. He sat tall in his saddle, a rangy man with sun-darkened skin and a hat pulled low against the glare. His horse was a strong paint gelding, well cared for and sturdy. He dismounted with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot, and he paused at the fence line, seeming to take in the state of her property with a careful eye. She walked outside, wiping her hands on her apron, trying to stand straight despite the weariness that had settled into her bones. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 30 years old, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. His face was weathered but kind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. "Afternoon, madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal that unruly hair. "Name is Yates Emerson. I was passing through and could not help but notice your fence posts are leaning something terrible. Thought you might need a hand." Josephine felt her spine stiffen with pride that she could not afford. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Emerson, but I cannot pay for help." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Did not ask for payment, asked if you needed help." "I do not accept charity," she said, though the words felt foolish even as she spoke them. What was pride when her children were going hungry? Yates Emerson settled his hat back on his head and glanced toward the barn. "Your mare is favoring her left foreleg. You got fence posts down on the north pasture. Your chicken coop has a hole big enough for foxes, and your roof is missing shingles on the west side. Those are not opinions, madam. Those are facts. Now I am heading to Raton to meet up with a cattle drive, but it does not start for another week. I have time and ability and you have need. Seems like simple mathematics to me." Josephine wanted to refuse. Wanted to send him away and maintain the illusion that she could manage this alone. But Margaret chose that moment to appear in the doorway, her two thin frames silhouetted against the dim interior, and Josephine felt her resistance crumble. "I can offer you meals," she said quietly. "And a place in the barn to sleep. That is all I have." Yates nodded once as if that settled the matter. "That will do just fine, madam. Now, if you will point me toward your tools, I will get started on that fence." She showed him to the small shed where Thomas had kept his equipment, acutely aware of how inadequate it all was. The hammer had a loose handle. The saw was dull. The nails were precious and few. Yates examined each item without comment, then set to work as if he had the finest tools money could buy. That evening, Josephine prepared supper from the last of their salt pork and some withered potatoes from the cellar. It was a meager meal, barely enough to satisfy growing children, and she felt shame burn her cheeks as she set it on the table. Yates came in at her call, his shirt dark with sweat and his hands dirty from labor. He washed at the pump outside, then sat where she indicated, across from the children who watched him with wide, uncertain eyes. "This looks wonderful," he said, and there was no pity in his voice, only genuine appreciation. "I have been eating my own cooking for 3 months, and I assure you, anything tastes better than that." Samuel giggled, the first happy sound Josephine had heard from him in weeks. Margaret smiled tentatively. Josephine felt something tight in her chest loosen just slightly. Over dinner, Yates told stories about his travels, about a town in Kansas where the mayor was a woman who could outshoot any man, about a ranch in Wyoming where they raised horses so fast they seemed to fly. He spoke to the children as if they were people worth listening to, asking Margaret about the wildflowers she had picked and asking Samuel about the creek that ran through the property. By the time the meal was finished, both children were animated in a way Josephine had feared she might never see again. After the children were in bed, Josephine went outside to where Yates was settling into the barn. She carried a blanket, one of the few good ones she had not yet sold, and found him arranging hay into a makeshift bed. "Mr. Emerson," she began, then stopped, unsure what she wanted to say. He looked up, brushing hay from his pants. "Yates, please. Mister makes me feel like my father." "Yates," she corrected. "I want you to know that I am grateful, more than I can express." He studied her face in the dim lantern light. "You are doing the best you can in a hard situation. No shame in accepting help when it is offered." "There is also no reason for a stranger to offer it," she said. "Why are you doing this?" Yates was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "My mother was widowed when I was about your son's age. Cattle stampede took my father. We would have lost everything if not for neighbors who stepped in to help. I learned young that people need people, and there is no weakness in that. It is just the way life works." Josephine felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. "Well, I am grateful nonetheless." "You said that already," he replied, but he was smiling, and she found herself smiling back. The next day, Yates worked on the fence posts, resetting them deep into the ground and reinforcing them with boards he salvaged from the collapsed section of the old chicken run. Josephine watched him work between her own chores, noting the efficient way he moved, the strength in his arms as he wielded the post-hole digger. He was a man accustomed to hard labor, and he approached it with a kind of steady patience that she found oddly comforting. In the afternoon, he examined her mare's leg and determined it was a stone bruise, painful but not permanent. He showed her how to wrap it properly, his hands gentle on the horse's leg, his voice low and soothing. The mare, who had been skittish since the injury, calmed under his touch. "You have a way with animals," Josephine observed. "Animals are easier than people," Yates said. "They tell you straight what they need. People are more complicated." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Yates would wake at dawn and work on whatever task was most pressing while Josephine tended to the household and her washing work. At midday, they would share a simple meal, usually cornbread and whatever vegetables Josephine could coax from her struggling garden. The children would chatter about their morning adventures, and Yates would listen with genuine interest. In the evenings, after supper, Yates would sometimes play his harmonica while Margaret and Samuel danced, their laughter filling the small house with a warmth it had not known in months. Josephine found herself watching Yates more than she cared to admit, the way he smiled at her children, the way he treated her with respect, never condescending, never assuming, the way he looked in the evening light, his face relaxed and open. She felt guilty for noticing, felt as if she were betraying Thomas's memory, but the feelings persisted nonetheless. On the fifth day, Yates repaired the roof, climbing up with the few shingles Josephine had left, and somehow making them stretch further than they should have. Josephine held the ladder and watched him work, calling up warnings when he leaned too far. When he climbed down, he was grinning. "You are a persistent worrier, you know that," he said. "Someone has to be," she replied. "You lean over that edge like you have wings." "Maybe I do." "You cannot prove I do not." She laughed, actually laughed, and the sound surprised her. "You are ridiculous, been called worse," he said, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. That night, after the children were asleep, Josephine could not settle. She sat on the front step, looking out at the vast darkness of the prairie, thinking about all the ways her life had changed in such a short time. She heard the barn door creak and saw Yates emerge, his hair mussed from sleep. "Heard you come out," he said, settling onto the step beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Everything all right. I cannot sleep," she admitted. "Too many thoughts. Want to share them?" She hesitated, then found herself speaking. "I keep thinking about August. About what happens when you leave and I am alone again. I have been managing these few days because you are here, but the payment is still due and I am no closer to having the money. I am going to lose this place, Yates. I am going to fail my children." He was quiet for a long time, staring out at the same darkness she was. Finally, he spoke. "What if you did not have to do it alone?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if someone stayed, helped you work the ranch, helped you make it profitable again?" She turned to look at him, her heart beginning to pound. "You have your cattle drive. Cattle drives come and go. They are a job, not a life." He met her eyes. "I am saying I could stay if you wanted, help you get this place back on its feet. Fair partnership, split the profits once you start turning them." "Why would you do that?" she whispered. He reached over and very carefully took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. "Because in 5 days you and your children have come to matter to me. Because I think you are the strongest person I have ever met. Because when I think about riding away from here, everything in me says it would be a mistake." Josephine's breath caught in her throat. "Yates, I am not ready. Thomas has been gone only 2 months. I cannot just—" "I am not asking you to be ready," he said quickly. "I am not asking for anything except the chance to stay and help. Whatever else happens or does not happen, that can sort itself out in time. I just know I do not want to leave." She looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers, feeling something she had thought died with Thomas beginning to stir in her chest. It terrified her and thrilled her in equal measure. "All right," she said finally. "Stay, help me save this place. But Yates, I need you to understand that I cannot promise anything beyond that right now." "I am not asking you to," he said, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. "I am a patient man, Josephine." Hearing her name on his lips sent a shiver through her. It was the first time he had used it, and somehow it felt significant, like crossing a threshold from which there was no return. The next morning, Yates rode into Raton and sent a telegram declining the cattle drive position. When he returned, he had supplies purchased with his own money over Josephine's protests, including lumber for more repairs, proper nails, and a sack of oats for the horses. He also brought peppermint sticks for the children, who received them with squeals of delight. "You did not have to do that," Josephine said, watching Margaret and Samuel enjoy their treats. "I wanted to," Yates replied. "When is the last time those kids had something sweet?" She could not answer because she could not remember, and that realization made her chest ache. Over the following weeks, the ranch began to transform. Yates worked from sunup to sundown, and Josephine worked beside him whenever she could, learning skills Thomas had never taught her because he had thought her too delicate. Yates thought no such thing. He showed her how to properly mend a fence, how to shoe a horse, how to read the signs of illness in cattle. He treated her as an equal partner, respecting her intelligence and her capability. In return, Josephine taught him things he did not know: how to make soap from lye and fat, how to preserve vegetables so they would last through winter, how to identify which prairie plants were edible and which were poison. They made a good team, each bringing different strengths, each covering the other's weaknesses. The children flourished under the new arrangement. Samuel began to smile again, following Yates around like a devoted shadow, asking endless questions that Yates answered with patience and humor. Margaret came out of her shell, her natural brightness returning as security replaced fear. She helped her mother with cooking and cleaning, but she also learned to braid rope and curry horses, skills that would serve her well in this hard land. Josephine found herself thinking about Yates at odd moments. The way he laughed, a deep rumble that seemed to come from his chest. The way he was gentle with her children but firm when they needed guidance. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not watching, with an expression that made her heart race. She told herself she was being foolish, that it was too soon, that she should still be mourning. But grief was a strange thing, and she discovered it could coexist with other feelings. new and frightening as they were. One evening in July, after a particularly long day of branding the calves that had been born in spring, Josephine and Yates sat on the porch while the children played in the yard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed too beautiful for this harsh world. "We might actually make it," Josephine said, almost afraid to speak the words aloud. "The cattle are healthy. The ranch is in better shape than it has been in years. If we sell the calves in September, we will have enough for the payment and then some." "We will make it," Yates said with certainty. "No might about it." She looked at him, this man who had ridden into her life at her lowest moment and refused to leave. "Why are you really here, Yates? And do not tell me it is just because your mother was widowed. There is more to it than that." He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. "You want the honest truth, always." "I have been drifting for near 10 years, ever since my mother passed, going from job to job, place to place, never settling because nothing felt like home. Then I rode into your yard and saw you standing there, tired and proud and refusing to break, and something in me just knew. This was where I was supposed to be. You were who I was supposed to find." Josephine's breath caught. "Yates, I know it is too soon," he said quickly. "I know you are not ready, but you asked for honesty, and that is the honest truth. I am not going anywhere, Josephine. Whether you ever feel the same way or not, I am staying. This is my home now, if you will let it be." She reached over and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, but I feel it. It scares me half to death." He turned to her, his eyes searching her face. "What scares you?" "That I am betraying Thomas, that it is too fast, that you will realize I come with too much baggage, too many responsibilities. That I will lose you like I lost him, and I do not think I could survive that again." Yates shifted closer, raising their joined hands to press a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was so tender it brought tears to her eyes. "You are not betraying anyone by choosing to live, Josephine. Thomas would not want you to spend the rest of your life alone. As for too fast, who says there is a right timeline for these things? The heart wants what it wants when it wants it. And baggage." He glanced toward Margaret and Samuel, who were catching fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Those are not baggage. Those are blessings. As for losing me, well, I cannot promise nothing bad will ever happen, but I can promise I will fight with everything I have to stay with you for as long as this life allows." A tear slipped down her cheek, and he reached up to gently wipe it away. "I am so tired of being strong," she admitted. "Then let me be strong for both of us for a while," he said. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder, and felt his arm come around her. They sat like that as darkness fell, the children's laughter ringing through the air, and Josephine felt something she had not felt since before Thomas died. She felt hope. August arrived with scorching heat that shimmered off the plains in visible waves. Josephine and Yates worked harder than ever, preparing for the sale that would determine their fate. The cattle were sleek and healthy, a testament to their hard work. The ranch looked presentable, no longer the desperate, failing operation it had been 3 months ago. On a sweltering afternoon, Mr. Morrison rode out from town, his face set in the officious expression of a man about to deliver bad news. Josephine felt her stomach clench as she watched him dismount, but Yates came to stand beside her, his presence steadying. "Mrs. Crawford," Morrison began, consulting a ledger he had brought, "I have come to discuss your situation. The payment is due in 2 weeks, and I need to know if you will be able to meet your obligation." Before Josephine could speak, Yates stepped forward. "We will have the money, Morrison. We are selling cattle in September, and the payment will be in your hands before the deadline." Morrison looked at Yates with barely concealed skepticism. "And who might you be?" "Yates Emerson. I am Mrs. Crawford's business partner. This ranch is back in operation, as you can see if you care to look around. The mortgage will be paid in full." Morrison did look around, his expression shifting from skepticism to surprise as he took in the repaired fences, the healthy livestock, the freshly painted barn. "Well," he said slowly, "this is unexpected. I must say, Mrs. Crawford, I had anticipated a different conversation." "Life is full of surprises," Josephine said coolly. "Will that be all?" Morrison tipped his hat, a gesture that seemed almost respectful. "Indeed. I will expect you in my office before the end of the month." After he rode away, Josephine turned to Yates, laughing with relief and residual fear. "Did you see his face? He looked like he swallowed a lemon," Yates said, grinning. "Probably had plans for this property already." "Let him make plans elsewhere," Josephine said fiercely. "This land is ours." Yates's grin softened into something more tender. "Ours. I like the sound of that." That night, after the children were in bed, Yates asked Josephine to walk with him. They strolled through the ranch, past the barn and the corrals, up to a small rise that overlooked the property. The moon was full, bathing everything in silver light, and the air had finally cooled to something bearable. "I have been thinking," Yates said as they stood looking out over the land they had saved together, "about the future, about what comes after we make that payment. What about it?" Josephine asked, though her heart was already racing. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I know it has only been a few months. I know by conventional standards this is rushed. But Josephine, I do not want to be just your business partner. I do not want to sleep in the barn and pretend I do not love you. Because I do love you. I love your strength and your determination. I love the way you care for your children. I love your laugh, which I did not hear for weeks but now hear every day. I love waking up knowing I get to see you. I love the life we are building together. And if you will have me, I want to make it official. I want to be your husband, a father to Margaret and Samuel, a true partner in every way." Josephine felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were not tears of grief or fear. "I love you too," she whispered. "I fought it for so long because I felt guilty, but Yates, I love you so much it terrifies me. Yes, yes, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Then he kissed her, tender and sweet and full of promise. Josephine melted into him, feeling years of loneliness and struggle finally ease. This was not a betrayal of her past. This was an embrace of her future. They were married 3 weeks later, on a beautiful September morning in the small church in Raton. Margaret and Samuel stood up with them, beaming with joy that their mother was happy again and that Yates, who they had come to love, would officially be part of their family. The whole town came out for the wedding, the same people who had watched Josephine struggle and had not known how to help, now celebrating her triumph. The morning after the wedding, Yates moved his things from the barn into the house, into the bedroom that Josephine had once shared with Thomas. She had been worried it would feel wrong, but when Yates pulled her into his arms that first night as husband and wife, all she felt was right. "I am happy," she told him in the darkness, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I did not think I would ever be happy again, but I am." "Good," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair, "because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." The cattle sale in September exceeded their expectations. The buyer from Denver was impressed with the quality of their herd and paid top dollar. Josephine and Yates walked into Morrison's bank with the full mortgage payment plus extra, the satisfaction of proving him wrong sweeter than honey. With the ranch secured, they turned their attention to expansion. Yates knew cattle and Josephine had a head for business. Together, they made plans to increase the herd, to buy the adjacent property that had gone abandoned, to build a proper barn that could house twice the livestock. They worked side by side every day, partners in every sense of the word. Margaret and Samuel thrived with Yates as their father. He taught Samuel to ride, spending patient hours in the corral until the boy could sit a horse with confidence. He taught Margaret to rope, laughing with delight when she managed to lasso a fence post on her third try. He read them stories in the evening, made them laugh with silly voices, and tucked them in each night with the same care Josephine did. "You are a natural father," Josephine told him one evening after the children were asleep. "They make it easy," Yates replied. "They are good kids. You raise them well." "We are raising them," she corrected. "Not just me anymore. We." He smiled and pulled her close, and she thought about how much had changed since that June day when he had ridden into her yard. She had been broken, desperate, failing. He had given her hope, partnership, and love. He had given her a life worth living. By the following spring, the ranch was prosperous beyond Josephine's dreams. They had purchased the adjacent land, expanded the herd, and hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work. The house had been expanded too, with a new bedroom for when guests visited and a proper study where Josephine kept the business records. One evening in late May, Josephine realized she had not had her monthly courses in some time. She did the calculation in her head, felt the slight tenderness in her breasts, the odd queasiness she had been attributing to something she ate. She sought out Yates in the barn where he was grooming one of the horses, and when he looked up and saw her face, he immediately set down the brush. "What is wrong?" he asked, concern creasing his brow. "Nothing is wrong," she said, taking his hands. "Yates, I am with child." His eyes went wide, and for a moment he simply stared at her. Then a grin spread across his face, so full of joy it took her breath away. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, and she laughed too, dizzy with happiness and relief that he was pleased. "We are having a baby," he said wonderingly, setting her down but keeping his hands on her waist. "Josephine, we are having a baby. Are you happy?" She asked, though she could see that he was. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said, kneeling down to press a kiss to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father. I cannot wait to meet you." Margaret and Samuel were told that evening over supper, and their reactions were everything Josephine could have hoped for. Margaret squealed with excitement at the prospect of being a big sister, and Samuel announced solemnly that he would teach the baby everything he knew, which made Yates hide a smile behind his hand. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Josephine continued to work as much as she could, though Yates grew increasingly protective as her belly swelled. By August, she was enormous and uncomfortable, waddling around the house and complaining about her swollen ankles. Yates doted on her shamelessly, rubbing her feet each evening and bringing her cold water from the well whenever she wanted. "You are spoiling me," she told him one particularly hot afternoon as he fanned her with a piece of folded paper. "You are growing my child," he replied. "You deserve to be spoiled." "Our child," she corrected with a smile. "Our child," he agreed, leaning down to kiss her. The baby came on a cool September evening, 2 years almost to the day since Yates had first ridden into their lives. The labor was hard but relatively quick, attended by the doctor from Raton and the midwife who lived on the neighboring ranch. Yates paced outside the bedroom, his usual calm shattered by worry, until the midwife finally opened the door and beckoned him inside. Josephine lay in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. "Yates," she said softly, "come meet your son." He approached slowly, as if afraid he might break something, and looked down at the tiny red face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had dark hair like his father and was making small, mewing sounds that tugged at something deep in Yates's chest. "He is perfect," Yates whispered, reaching out to stroke one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers closed around his thumb with surprising strength, and Yates felt tears prick his eyes. "What should we name him?" Josephine looked up at him with tired eyes full of love. "I was thinking Jacob. Jacob Thomas Emerson. Thomas for my first husband who gave me Margaret and Samuel. But Emerson for you who gave us all a future." Yates had to swallow hard against the lump in his throat. "That is perfect. Jacob Thomas Emerson. Welcome to the world, little man." Margaret and Samuel were allowed in to meet their new brother, and they were careful and gentle, stroking his soft head and marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. That night, with his family all around him, Yates felt a contentment so profound it almost frightened him. This was what life was meant to be, not drifting from place to place, but building something solid and lasting. Not running from connection, but embracing it with both hands. The years that followed were good ones. Jacob grew into a lively toddler, full of mischief and laughter. Margaret blossomed into a beautiful young woman who could rope and ride as well as any ranch hand. Samuel grew tall and strong, with his mother's business sense, and his stepfather's way with animals. The ranch prospered under Josephine and Yates's joint management, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. When Margaret turned 18, she began courting the son of a neighboring rancher, a kind young man who treated her with respect and made her laugh. Yates gave his blessing with tears in his eyes, proud of the woman she had become. Samuel, at 15, was already being courted by buyers who wanted him to come work for them, recognizing his talent with livestock, but he had no interest in leaving the family ranch. On a cool October evening in 1883, 5 years after their marriage, Josephine and Yates sat on the porch watching the sunset. Jacob, now 3 years old, was playing in the yard with a wooden horse Yates had carved for him. Margaret was inside preparing dinner, and Samuel was finishing up the evening chores in the barn. "Do you ever think about that day?" Josephine asked, leaning against Yates's shoulder. "The day you rode up to my fence and offered to help a complete stranger." "I think about it often," Yates admitted. "Best decision I ever made." "I was so close to losing everything," Josephine said quietly. "The ranch, my children's future, any hope of happiness. And then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I had not even known how to speak." Yates took her hand, their fingers intertwining in the familiar way they had 1,000 times before. "I was lost before I found you. Oh, I did not know I was lost. I thought I was free, drifting wherever the wind took me. But there is a difference between freedom and purpose. You gave me purpose. You and these children, this ranch, this life we have built. You gave me everything that matters." "We gave each other everything," Josephine said, turning to kiss him softly. "You saved me, Yates Emerson." "No," he said, pulling back to look into her eyes. "We saved each other." As the sun set over the Colorado plains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The grief that had nearly destroyed her, the fear that had threatened to consume her. The moment of grace when a stranger became a friend, then a partner, then the love of her life. She thought about Thomas, who she would always carry in her heart, and she knew he would be happy that she had found joy again. She thought about her children, who had weathered so much and come through stronger for it. Most of all, she thought about the man beside her, who had ridden into her life when she needed him most and had never left. The following spring brought change and celebration. Margaret married her young man in a beautiful ceremony on the ranch, with the whole territory seeming to turn out for the festivities. Josephine cried through the entire wedding, overwhelmed with joy, and the bittersweet ache of watching her daughter begin her own journey. Yates stood beside her, solid and reassuring, his hand warm in hers. After the wedding, Margaret and her new husband, Daniel, built a house on the eastern section of the ranch. They would work the land together, raising cattle and eventually children of their own, staying close to family while building their independence. Josephine was grateful they would not be far away, that she would still see her daughter regularly. Samuel, now 16, had grown into a fine young man with his stepfather's calm demeanor and his mother's sharp mind. He had no interest in courting yet, much more focused on the ranch and learning everything he could about breeding quality cattle. Yates took him to auctions and taught him to evaluate stock, to negotiate prices, to build relationships with other ranchers. They made a formidable team. Jacob, at 4 years old, was a whirlwind of energy who kept everyone on their toes. He had inherited Yates's sense of humor and Josephine's stubborn determination, a combination that meant he was constantly getting into trouble and talking his way out of it. He followed his older brother everywhere, desperate to be included in the work of the ranch, though he was still too small to be much help. One summer evening, as Josephine was putting Jacob to bed, he looked up at her with serious eyes and asked, "Mama, will you tell me the story again?" "About when Papa came," Josephine smiled, settling beside him on the small bed Yates had built. "Once upon a time," she began, "when you were not even born yet, your mama was very sad and very scared. The ranch was falling apart and I did not know how to fix it. But then one day, a cowboy rode into our yard. He had kind eyes and a good heart, and he offered to help even though he did not know us at all. That cowboy was your papa." "And he fixed everything?" Jacob asked, though he had heard this story 100 times. "He did," Josephine confirmed. "But more than that, he brought love and laughter back into our lives. He became Papa to Margaret and Samuel, and then he became your Papa too. He gave us a life worth living." "I am glad Papa came," Jacob said sleepily, his eyes already drifting closed. "So am I, sweetheart," Josephine whispered, kissing his forehead. "So am I." She found Yates in their bedroom, already in bed but still awake, reading by lamplight. He set the book aside when she entered, opening his arms in invitation. She slipped in beside him, fitting herself against his solid warmth. "Jacob wanted the story again," she said. "He never tires of it," Yates replied, amusement in his voice. "I think he imagines I rode in on a white horse instead of that old paint gelding." "You rode in on a white horse as far as I am concerned," Josephine said. "My rescuer, my hero." "I am no hero," Yates protested. "I am just a man who loved you from the moment I saw you standing in your yard, refusing to break no matter how hard life pushed." "Then I loved a stranger," Josephine said, "which seems foolish when I say it out loud. Not a stranger, just someone you had not met yet." He kissed her temple, her cheek, her lips. "Someone who was always meant to find you." They made love slowly, tenderly, with the easy comfort of two people who knew each other's bodies as well as their own. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Josephine thought about how different her life was from what she had imagined as a young bride. She had thought she would grow old with Thomas, raise their children together, live a simple life. Instead, she had known grief and hardship, had nearly lost everything, and had been given a second chance at happiness with a man who loved her completely. "Are you awake?" Yates asked softly into the darkness. "Yes, I was thinking about expanding the breeding program. Samuel has some good ideas about bringing in new stock from Texas. It would be a significant investment, but I think it could pay off." Josephine smiled against his chest. Even after all these years, they still talked business in bed, still planned and dreamed together. "Tell me more." They talked long into the night, making plans, solving problems, being the partners they had been from the very beginning. Eventually, they drifted into sleep, Josephine's head on Yates's shoulder, his arm around her waist, holding her close even in unconsciousness. 2 years later, in the spring of 1886, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. She was 34 years old now, and this pregnancy was harder than the one with Jacob. She was more tired, more uncomfortable, and Yates worried over her constantly. But when their daughter was born on a crisp November morning, healthy and squalling with indignation at the world, it all seemed worth it. They named her Rose Catherine Emerson, Rose for Yates's mother and Catherine for Josephine's. She had blonde hair like Josephine and would eventually grow to have Yates's warm brown eyes. Jacob, now 6 years old, was enchanted with his baby sister and appointed himself her protector, a role he took very seriously. Margaret came to visit with her husband and their own new baby, a son they had named Thomas after Josephine's first husband. Josephine held her grandson and felt the circle of life turning, felt the way joy and sorrow intertwined to create something beautiful and complex. She looked around at her family gathered in her home, Margaret and Daniel with their baby, Samuel now grown tall and capable, Jacob hovering protectively near his baby sister, Yates watching it all with contentment written on his face and felt blessed beyond measure. The ranch continued to prosper. Samuel's ideas about breeding proved sound, and their cattle became sought after throughout Colorado and beyond. Daniel proved to be a natural addition to the operation, and with 3 capable men running things, the ranch ran smoothly. Josephine focused more on the business end, managing accounts and contracts, while still making time for her young children. When Jacob was 10 and Rose was 4, Josephine sat them both down one evening and told them stories about their older sibling's father, about Thomas Crawford, who had been a good man taken too soon. She wanted them to know the full history of their family, to understand that love came in many forms, and that honoring the past did not diminish the present. Jacob listened solemnly, asking thoughtful questions about the man who had been married to his mother before his father. Rose, still too young to fully understand, mostly wanted to know if Thomas had liked horses, which made everyone laugh. That night, Yates thanked Josephine for including Thomas in their family story. "He was part of making you who you are," Yates said. "The children should know about him." "I loved him," Josephine said. "I want to be honest about that. But Yates, what I feel for you is different. Deeper, maybe because I am older and have lived through harder things. Or maybe just because you are you. Either way, I need you to know that you are not second place or a replacement. You are the love of my life." Yates pulled her close, emotion thick in his voice. "You are mine too. Everything good in my life started the day I rode into your yard." The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of family life. Samuel married at 22, choosing a smart young woman from Raton who had been educated back east but preferred the western life. They built a house on the northern section of the ranch and began their own family, adding to the growing Emerson clan. Margaret's family grew as well, with 2 more children following their firstborn. The ranch became a bustling operation with multiple households, all working together toward common goals. Sunday dinners at the main house became a tradition, with everyone gathering around the long table Yates had built to accommodate the growing family. Jacob grew into a young man who shared his father's wanderlust, but tempered it with his mother's practicality. At 18, he announced his intention to travel, to see something of the world beyond Colorado before settling down. Josephine's heart ached at the thought of him leaving, but she understood. He needed to find his own path, just as Yates had once drifted until he found where he belonged. "Let him go," Yates counseled when Josephine fretted over the decision. "He will come back. This land is in his blood and we are in his heart. He just needs to be sure this is what he wants, not just what is expected." Yates was right, as he often was. Jacob returned after a year of traveling, having seen Denver and San Francisco and a dozen towns in between. He came home with stories and experience, and an appreciation for the life his parents had built. He took his place on the ranch with new enthusiasm, bringing fresh ideas and energy. Rose, meanwhile, grew into a spirited young woman who could outrope her brothers and had a head for numbers that impressed even Josephine. She had no interest in the traditionally feminine pursuits, much preferring to work the ranch alongside the men. Josephine supported her daughter's independence, remembering her own struggles and wanting Rose to have choices she herself had not. In 1895, Josephine turned 43 years old. She and Yates had been married for 17 years, together for even longer than that. They sat on the porch on her birthday, the same porch where they had shared so many significant moments, and looked out over the empire they had built together. "You ever think about what your life would have been if I had ridden past your ranch that day?" Yates asked. "If I had not stopped?" Josephine considered the question seriously. "I think eventually I would have found a way to survive. I am too stubborn to have done otherwise. But surviving is not the same as living, Yates. You did not just help me keep the ranch. You gave me back my life. You gave me love and partnership and joy. You gave my children a father and gave me more children to love. You turned survival into a life worth living. You gave me the same," Yates said, taking her hand. "A home, a purpose, a family, everything that matters." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, as it had set thousands of times before and would set thousands of times again. The ranch bustled around them with the life they had created: children and grandchildren, livestock and land, prosperity built on hard work and love. Margaret's oldest son, Thomas, now a young man himself, rode past the house, tipping his hat respectfully to his grandparents. Samuel's daughter, Sarah, was helping her mother hang laundry, her laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Jacob was in the corral, working with a new horse, his movements echoing his father's patient skill. Rose was in the barn, probably buried in the account books, determined to master every aspect of the operation. "We did good," Yates said softly. "We did very good," Josephine agreed. As twilight deepened into night, they went inside to the home they had shared for so many years. The house was full of memories layered upon memories: children growing up, celebrations and sorrows, ordinary days that had accumulated into an extraordinary life. That night, lying in bed, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought her from desperate widow to prosperous matriarch. It had not been easy. There had been setbacks and struggles, years when the weather was bad or the cattle prices dropped or illness struck the family. But through it all, Yates had been beside her, steady and strong, facing every challenge as a partner. She thought about Thomas sometimes, with fondness and residual sadness, but the pain had long since faded. He would always be part of her story, but Yates was her present and her future. Yates had taught her that it was possible to honor the past while embracing the present, to carry old love in her heart while making room for new love to grow. The ranch thrived under the family's management, gaining a reputation throughout Colorado and beyond. They were known for quality cattle, fair dealing, and the way they treated their workers with respect and decent wages. Young men sought jobs on the Emerson ranch because they knew they would be treated well and would learn valuable skills. Rose eventually married at 23, choosing a young lawyer from Denver who was willing to live ranch life, despite his city upbringing. He proved surprisingly adaptable, and Rose's sharp business mind combined with his legal knowledge made them invaluable to the operation. They settled in the western section of the ranch, continuing the pattern of keeping family close while respecting independence. Jacob married at 25, finding a woman as adventurous as himself, and together they managed the most remote section of the ranch, the area that bordered the mountains. They seemed to thrive on the isolation and challenge, building a life that was uniquely their own while still being part of the larger family enterprise. By the turn of the century, Josephine and Yates were in their late 40s, and the ranch employed over 20 people full-time. They had 15 grandchildren with more on the way, and the family gatherings required careful planning and enormous amounts of food. Josephine often looked around at these gatherings, overwhelmed by how far they had come from that desperate June day in 1878. One evening at one such gathering, Margaret's oldest son Thomas stood up to make an announcement. He was engaged to be married, and the wedding would be in the fall. As everyone cheered and congratulated him, Josephine felt tears slip down her cheeks. Yates, sitting beside her, squeezed her hand. "Happy tears?" he asked quietly. "So happy," she confirmed. "I am thinking about how close we came to losing all of this. If you had not stopped that day, if I had given up, all of these people, all of these lives, they would not exist. But I did stop," Yates reminded her. "And you did not give up. And here we are." "Here we are," she echoed, looking around at her family 3 generations now, all gathered under the roof of the house that love had saved. The years continued their relentless march. Josephine and Yates grew older, their hair silvering, their movements slowing. They turned more and more of the ranch management over to their children, though they remained involved and engaged. They had earned the right to slow down, to spend their days as they pleased rather than as necessity demanded. They took to sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes their children or grandchildren would join them, seeking advice or just company. Other times it was just the two of them, as it had been in the beginning. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the family threw them a huge celebration. Over 100 people attended, including neighbors, workers past and present, and people from Raton who remembered Josephine's struggles and celebrated her triumphs. There was music and dancing and so much food the tables groaned under the weight. During a quiet moment, Josephine and Yates slipped away from the party, walking up to the small rise where Yates had proposed all those years ago. The ranch spread out below them, lights twinkling from the various houses, music floating on the night air. 25 years, Josephine said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like forever. Both, Yates said, pulling her close. Every day with you has been a gift, Josephine, even the hard days, especially the hard days because we faced them together. I love you, she said, tilting her face up to kiss him. More now than ever. Is that possible? To love someone more after 25 years than at the beginning? With us, anything is possible, Yates replied. We proved that a long time ago. They stayed up on the rise until the party wound down, until their children came looking for them, laughing about their parents sneaking away. They returned to the celebration, to the family they had built, to the life they had created from desperation and hope and stubborn determination. More years passed in a gentle blur of contentment. They became great-grandparents, marveling at the tiny faces that carried forward their combined legacy. The ranch continued to prosper under the capable management of the younger generation, though Josephine and Yates still offered advice when asked. On a summer evening in 1910, when Josephine was 58 and Yates was 62, they sat on their beloved porch watching another sunset. Josephine had grown frail over the winter, a illness that she could not quite shake, leaving her weaker than before. Yates hovered over her constantly, his worry evident despite his attempts to hide it. "Stop fretting," Josephine told him, patting his hand. "I am fine." "You are not fine," Yates said bluntly. "And I am allowed to fret. It is my job as your husband." 32 years you have been doing this job," Josephine said with a smile. "Do you ever regret it? Tying yourself to a widow with 2 children and a failing ranch?" "Not once," Yates said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Marrying you was the smartest thing I ever did. You gave me everything worth having." "We gave each other everything," Josephine corrected, as she had so many times over the years. "Partners, remember." "Partners," he agreed, raising their joined hands to kiss her knuckles. "Always." Josephine's health improved with the spring, and she rallied enough to attend Jacob's son's wedding. She danced with Yates at the reception, moving slower than they once had but still graceful, still in perfect harmony. Their children and grandchildren watched with fond smiles, the love between the patriarch and matriarch of the family evident to everyone. "They still look at each other like newlyweds," Margaret commented to Samuel, both of them watching their parents dance. "I hope I love someone like that someday," Samuel's daughter said wistfully, young enough to still be romantic about such things. "Your grandmother was a widow who almost lost everything," Margaret said. "Your grandfather was a drifter with no place to call home. They built all of this together, from nothing but love and hard work. If that is not romantic, I do not know what is." The years mellowed into a peaceful rhythm. Josephine and Yates lived quietly, surrounded by family, secure in the knowledge that the ranch would continue long after they were gone. They told stories to their great-grandchildren, passing down the family history and the lessons they had learned. On a cool autumn evening in 1915, Josephine and Yates celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner prepared by Rose. Just family, no big party, exactly as they wanted it. After dinner, as had become their habit, they sat on the porch together. 37 years, Yates mused, and almost 40 since the day I rode up to your fence. Does it feel like a long time to you? Yes and no, Josephine said, leaning against his shoulder as she had thousands of times before. My life before you feels like a dream. Like it happened to someone else. This right here, this is reality, this is home. I was going to say the same thing, Yates admitted. Everything before you was just passing time. Everything after you has been living. They watched the sun set over the land they had built together, the empire that had started with desperation and help offered without expectation of return. 3 generations of their family lived and worked on this ranch now, with a 4th generation just beginning. It was a legacy beyond what either of them could have imagined that day in 1878 when a cowboy stopped to help a widow in need. "Do you remember what you told me that first night?" Josephine asked. "When I asked why you were helping." "I told you about my mother," Yates replied. "About learning that people need people. You said there was no weakness in accepting help," Josephine continued. "You were right. Accepting your help was the strongest thing I ever did. It saved my life and my children's lives. It gave us all this." "You saved yourself," Yates insisted. "I just gave you a hand up. You did the rest." "We did the rest," Josephine corrected one last time. "Together. Always together." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who had chosen each other across the years and never wavered. They had faced hardship and triumph, sorrow and joy, always side by side. They had built something lasting and beautiful, not just a ranch but a family, a legacy, a love story that would be told and retold for generations. Josephine thought about the young widow she had been, standing in her doorway watching a stranger ride away with her last dollars, certain she would lose everything. She thought about the man who had appeared as if sent by Providence, who had seen her struggling and refused to ride past. She thought about all the years since, the life they had built, the love that had grown and deepened and sustained them. "I would do it all again," she said suddenly. "Every bit of it, even the hard parts, even losing Thomas because it led me here to you." Yates turned to look at her, his eyes bright with emotion. "I would too. I would ride past 100 ranches to find yours. I would stop every time." They kissed, a gentle press of lips that held 37 years of love and partnership and devotion. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. "Come on," Yates said, standing and offering his hand. "Let us go to bed. Morning comes early, even for retired ranchers." Josephine took his hand and let him help her up, her body protesting the movement in ways it never had when she was young. They walked into their house, the home they had shared for so long, and prepared for bed together with the easy intimacy of decades. That night, wrapped in Yates's arms, Josephine felt completely at peace. She had lived a full life, richer than she had ever dreamed possible. She had known love twice, had raised 4 children and helped raise countless grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She had built something that would last long after she was gone. Most importantly, she had found Yates, or he had found her. Or perhaps they had simply found each other at exactly the right moment, 2 souls meant to meet and build a life together. However it had happened, she was grateful for every moment, every day, every year they had shared. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Yates replied, his voice already heavy with sleep. "Always have. Always will." Josephine closed her eyes, listening to Yates's breathing slow and deepen as he drifted off. She thought about tomorrow and all the tomorrows to come, about the family that would gather for Sunday dinner, about the ranch that hummed with activity and purpose. She thought about the cowboy who had given a struggling widow a chance at a life worth living, and how she had given him the same in return. Outside, the Colorado wind whispered through the grass, the same wind that had blown on that long-ago June day. The ranch stood solid and prosperous under the starlight, a testament to love and determination, and the simple act of one person choosing to help another. In the morning, Yates and Josephine would wake together as they had for 37 years. They would share coffee on the porch and watch the ranch come to life around them. They would spend another day surrounded by family, secure in their love for each other and the legacy they had built. And when night fell again, they would return to this bed, to this embrace, grateful for another day together. The story that had begun with desperation and a stranger's kindness had become a story of triumph and enduring love. Josephine Crawford, the struggling widow, had become Josephine Emerson, the matriarch of a ranching empire. Yates Emerson, the drifting cowboy, had found his home and his purpose. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, a life worth living in every possible way. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. Not the struggles of the past or the uncertainties of the future, but the love they had found and nurtured and protected through all the years. It was a love story for the ages, played out on the wild Colorado plains, a testament to the power of hope and the courage to accept help when it was offered. As dawn broke over the ranch the next morning, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Josephine and Yates faced another day together, hands joined, hearts intertwined, their love as strong and sure as the land beneath their feet. They had given each other everything that mattered, and they would continue to do so for all the days they had left, partners in every way, bound by love and choice, and the unbreakable bonds they had forged across nearly 4 decades together.